So what is object-oriented programming? Object-oriented programming is a programming paradigm or a style of programming that is centered around objects rather than functions. It's nothing new, it's been around since the 70s, but unlike tools and frameworks that come and go, object-oriented programming is still very relevant today. That's because it's not a programming language or a tool. It's a style of programming or a programming paradigm. There are several programming languages out there that support object-oriented programming, such as C#, Java, Ruby, Python, JavaScript, and more. Now, JavaScript is a little bit controversial, but I'll get to that later. It may interest you to know that many of the popular frameworks out there that you might be using are actually designed with object-oriented programming concepts in mind. Angular is an example of these frameworks. So object-oriented programming is a very popular style of programming, and it comes up in many technical interviews. So if you really want to be a serious developer, you need to understand object-oriented programming. As a technical interviewer myself, if I see a candidate with object-oriented programming on their resume, that candidate stands out to me. And that's where this crash course comes in. In this course, you're going to learn and understand object-oriented principles and how to implement them in JavaScript. My name is Mosh Hamedani, and I'm going to be your instructor in this course. If you enjoyed this video, please like and share it with others. And be sure to subscribe to my channel for new videos every week. You can also follow me on Twitter as Mosh Hamedani. So now, let's get started. A popular interview question concerns the 4 core concepts in object-oriented programming. These concepts are encapsulation, abstraction, inheritance, and polymorphism. Let's look at each of these concepts. Before object-oriented programming, we had procedural programming that divided a program into a set of functions. So we have data stored in a bunch of variables and functions that operate on the data. This style of programming is very simple and straightforward. Often it's what you will learn as part of your first programming subject at a university. But as your programs grow, you will end up with a bunch of functions that are all over the place. You might find yourself copying and pasting lines of code over and over. You make a change to one function and then several other functions break. That's what we call spaghetti code. There is so much interdependency between all these functions, it becomes problematic. Object-oriented programming came to solve this problem. In object-oriented programming, we combine a group of related variables and functions into a unit. We call that unit an object. We refer to these variables as properties and the functions as methods. Here's an example. Think of a car. A car is an object with properties such as make, model, and color, and methods like start, stop, and move. Now you might say, but Mosh, we don't have cars in our programs. Give me a real programming example. Okay, think of the local storage object in your browsers. Every browser has a local storage object that allows you to store data locally. This local storage object has a property like length, which returns the number of objects in the storage, and methods like setItem and removeItem. So in object-oriented programming, we group related variables and functions that operate on them into objects. And this is what we call encapsulation. Let me show you an example of this in action. So here we have 3 variables: base salary, overtime, and rate. Below these, we have a function to calculate the wage for an employee. We refer to this kind of implementation as procedural. So we have variables on one side and functions on the other side. They are decoupled. Now let's take a look at the object-oriented way to solve this problem. We can have an employee object with 3 properties: base salary, overtime, and rate, and a method called getWage. Now why is this better? Well, first of all, look at the getWage function. This function has no parameters. In contrast, in a procedural example, our getWage function has 3 parameters. The reason in this implementation we don't have any parameters is because all these parameters are actually modeled as properties of this object. All these properties and the getWage function, they're highly related, so they're part of one unit. So one of the symptoms of procedural code is functions with so many parameters. When you write code in an object-oriented way, your functions end up having fewer and fewer parameters. As Uncle Bob says, the best